Hey there, Games Apprentice, back with another Evercade review. This week I'm going to be reviewing the Codemasters Collection 1, aka the one with sensible soccer and a bunch of fodder. Founded by brothers Richard and David Darling in 1986, Codemasters is one of the oldest British game studios. Initially developing budget-priced games for the popular 8-bit home computer market in the United Kingdom, the company subsequently turned onto the global 8-bit and 16-bit gaming console markets and developed several technological innovations along the way. Today, the company is primarily known for its excellent lineup of racing games, but those who have been gaming since the early days will always have a soft spot for the company's strong lineup of cartoony arcade adventures and thrilling action games. Also founded in 1986, Sensible Software quickly established themselves as masters of games with solid playability, simple but effective and clear presentation, and a distinctly offbeat, very British sense of humour. Their games are among the most beloved titles of the 16-bit era, with the legendary Sensible Soccer even having the honour of being celebrated by a range of commemorative postage stamps by the UK's Royal Mail organisation in 2020. Sensible Software joined the Codemasters family in 1999. That's interesting because I was quite surprised to see that Sensible Soccer was on this collection. I didn't realise that Sensible Software had been acquired by Codemasters. You've probably heard of Codemasters. They're mainly famous for Micro Machines, Grade Dirt, Colin McRae Rally, the F1 games. Now, Micro Machines is a big omission from this collection. I assume it's something to do with licensing, as it would have been a popular one and it was a quality title. They did make a Micro Machines game about 5 years ago, so they do still have some involvement with them, but I expect licensing issues was a problem. What we do have, however, are 17 games, which is an impressive size collection. They're a mix of 8-bit and 16-bit from consoles and home computers, so I'm going to rank them from worst to best. Here we go. At number 17, we've got Linus Spacehead. Linus Spacehead is basically everything that's wrong with old school platformers. It's unnecessarily punishing with just one-hit kills, its platform mechanics are far from tight, and sometimes the controls just seem to do their own thing. It's got a few bonus points for the interesting level design of the first level, where you need to ride on bubbles to get to the top of the screen, but even with save states, I couldn't clear the second level and felt like I was losing my mind trying. This is a really awful platformer, and I can only assume it was included due to the inclusion of the much more interesting sequel that comes later on in this list. Avoid this one like the plague. Number 16, CJ's Elephant Antics. We've got another stinker here. So this is one of those deceptively cute platformers. They pick a cute mascot, an elephant in this case, give it a name, add some catchy music and some colourful visuals, and they expect you to enjoy it based on that. The music kind of reminded me of Captain Planet, but to be honest, I'd rather play Captain Planet, and that's saying something if you've ever played Captain Planet, because that is a terrible game. This game is just punishing. The hit detection on the spikes are massive to the point where some bits you just have to take the hit. Enemies stand in positions where you can't get past them or shoot them. Luckily, at least, it doesn't make you start over. A lot of these games, when you die, you have to start from the beginning, but this one, at least when you die, you start from where you died. But still, it's just not a good game. CJ's Elephant Antics is like one of those awful levels on Mario Maker, where they just throw all kinds of crap at you. The first level of the game should not be as difficult as this. Floating from heights is quite nice, almost another Captain Planet homage, but that's not a game you want to do an homage to. Number 15 is MiG-29. The MiG-29 is a bit like Afterburner, or if you've never played that, it's like Space Invaders but from a different perspective. You're essentially just trying to shoot everything on screen and also avoid everything crashing into you or being hit by homing missiles. It's marginally fun, although a bit too fast paced to be all that enjoyable. Constantly having to flee from homing missiles is particularly annoying, as is trying to judge if an object is about to hit you or if it's just large. Games like this are why 3D became essential in some genres, and this is most certainly one of them. Not a great game, but playable, that's about all I can say. Number 14, Big Nose the Caveman. Big Nose the Caveman grew on me a bit. Initially, when I recorded this, I lost the original footage that I had made of it, and I was dreading going back to play it, but the second time round it wasn't quite as bad. Initially it was rock bottom in the list because it is a flawed game. If you get hit and don't have any rocks, you die, and if you don't have any rocks, bosses are unbeatable and most enemies are a nightmare. Also the fact that if you're killed by a boss, it's basically game over. As I mentioned, they're impossible to beat without rocks, and it restarts you right next to the boss with no rocks. However, the rocks in Big Nose are clearly a metaphor for currency. Even though the actual currency is bones, having rocks, like having money, just makes things so much easier and more fun. Enemies aren't a problem as you can clear out anything that comes along on the screen, and bosses are more of a doddle, providing you don't get hit and become broke. The music is pretty catchy too, so if you've got a pocket full of rocks, you run, shoot, jump and enjoy the ride. If you don't have any rocks, it is horrible. Number 13 is Ultimate Stuntman. Now I really wanted to like this game, it's got a lot going for it, but the execution is pretty poor. You're the ultimate stuntman who's been called in because Dr. Evil, of all people, has kidnapped a scientist. Apparently that's all the information you need to turn yourself into a one-man army. Each level is done in a different genre, which is cool, and which is why I wanted to like it, but as you probably guessed, it doesn't do any of the styles well. The first level is a high-speed chase / shooter, and it's probably the most fun level. It takes a couple of attempts to learn the route, but it's not too hard. The second level is an action platformer, and it's pretty poor. The animations are terrible, nothing really makes sense. Why am I fighting robots and spiders? And nothing about it is particularly fun. Also, you've got to collect a bunch of keys to finish the level, but it doesn't tell you you've got to collect a bunch of keys. So you get to the end of the level and you get stuck and you've got to go back and find some keys. Jumping is weird, you can jump really high for some reason, and the level is also really cheap by putting spikes all over the place but forcing you to jump off buildings with no idea what's below. The third level though is where things really take a turn for the worse. You've got to climb up a building and shoot things, but moving and aiming the rectile both use the D-pad, so you've got to stop to shoot. And to make matters worse, the aiming rectile stays where you left it, so you constantly have to keep bringing it back to the middle, again making you stop because you need it to protect yourself. But worse still is that you've got a fairly short time limit to do the level, so you can't stop moving for long. If you do manage to finally do the level, you then get a horrible boss which was really punishing. I tried to beat it with a save state, as you'll see, and my save state saved in the worst possible time that it just became impossible. I always think it's quite disappointing when a game like this is this difficult because I quite want to see what's next. I want to see what other styles it's got coming up, and it's just too punishing for me to want to do that. Number 12 is Stunt Buggies. So I was expecting a racing game or some kind of point-based stunt car game, but no. I was quite surprised when I loaded it up to see something that looks like the overworld in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game on the NES. The gameplay itself is kind of a bit like Pac-Man, it controls a bit like Pac-Man. You drive a car around a maze, trying to avoid other vehicles until you've picked up all the bombs. There's also a few things you can pick up for more points, no fruit though. There's not a lot wrong with the game, it is what it is. If you like driving around a maze, maybe you'll like this, but it just wasn't for me. Number 11, F-16 Renegade. This is a fairly average shooter that's really just let down by the horrible colour palette. Green planes on a green background, and the fact that if there's too many planes on the screen at once, it just slows down and starts to flicker. There's not really anything special here, there's so many shooters out there like this, which makes it an odd choice for the collection. It's by no means a bad arcade shooter, it's just really generic and it struggles performance-wise. Number 10, Boomerang Kid. The Boomerang Kid was abandoned by his parents in the outback. Just let that sink in for a second. Boomerang Kid is a puzzle platformer. You've basically got to get all the boomerangs without being touched by an enemy. I feel like a game called Boomerang Kid should involve you throwing some boomerangs, not just collecting boomerangs. It just seems a weird choice, but whatever. It's pretty punishing, but that's by design as the levels are short puzzle levels. Fall damage kills you, so you've got to plan the route accordingly. and the music is Waltzing Matilda, which is both catchy but very irritating after a while. It's a decent game. The punishing difficulty and having to restart all the levels again make it a bit annoying. After you've done the first couple of levels, you don't really want to revisit them, you're not getting anything out of it. Number 9, Cosmic Spacehead. So this is the first game we get to on the list I'd actually heard of. I'd seen Cosmic Spacehead growing up, I remember seeing it in magazines, but it's never one I'd actually played. The box art looked enticing, the art of the game looked enticing. So not content with running people's lives the first time around, Linus returns with a much more appealing kid's name and design of Cosmic Spacehead. The game definitely has a lot more to offer than the first game. It's certainly unique in its style, mixing point and click adventure game and a platform game together. Sadly, neither is very good. The platforming is the same bad platforming from the first game. It's a little less punishing at least, as the levels are pretty short, but it's not fun. The point and click adventure is definitely the more fun of the two styles, however it's not exactly groundbreaking as far as point and click adventure games go, and having to do the entire point and click part again when you die too many times on the platforming part is just terrible game design. Number 8, Mega-Lo-Mania. Depending on who you are and if you've played this game before, Mega-Lo-Mania could probably come anywhere on this list. It could be the worst you've ever played, it could be the best. I'm sure in its day Mega-Lo-Mania would have been an amazing game as one of the earlier games in the RTS genre, but it's a genre that's still finding its way at the time. The initial issue with this game on the collection is that there's no tutorial or explanation of what to do, so a quick Google search can sort that out for you, but to be honest, I can't imagine anyone wanting to play this other than people who've played it before, as nostalgia is probably its best friend. You've basically got to create an army and defeat other armies, upgrading your tech, your weapons and your defences along the way. The controls for games like this with a D-pad are bad at the best of times, but this one really doesn't do much to help console players. Even with a time speed up option, the game still feels incredibly slow, it's fairly clunky, and there's just nothing intuitive about the controls or the design. Number 7, B-52. I assume B-52 is some sort of play on words to a B-52 bomber plane, which would make more sense if your B dropped bombs. It doesn't. B-52 is a sort of shoot 'em up / collecting game. You basically got to fly to flowers and get the sweet nectar until you can't carry any more, and then take it back to base until you've got enough to clear the level. And you need to do this before the ant gets to your base. You can shoot other insects and enemies on the way. You can also sting downwards to take out the spiders. It's fun, but it's pretty tough. One touch and you're dead. The flower detection isn't great either, as you'll often waste time just trying to get the exact angle to get into the flower. Still, it's a pretty unique game and there's definitely some fun to be had here. Number 6, Big Nose Freaks Out. So to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that Big Nose got a sequel. I suppose for an 8-bit game, the original was okay, but Big Nose Freaks Out is totally where it's at. The sequel changes a lot, the art style's different, it's now a lot more zoomed out, and it has to be because they've basically made a Sonic the Hedgehog clone. Now I'm a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan, so this was welcome to me. So Big Nose is now zooming around on his skateboard, and the levels are filled with multiple platforms and multiple routes to the end. He even spins in the air with his jumps. In fact, the only thing wrong with the gameplay is that it tried to be a little different from Sonic, and you can't jump on enemies' heads. If you touch them, you're dead. They've stuck to the same attack method as the original Big Nose game, where you can either hit them with your club or throw rocks at them. And it's a shame because there's so many moments where it just feels like you should be able to bounce off an enemy to continue your sweet speedrun. Still, it's a decent game and it's worth a go if you're a Sonic fan. Number 5 is Tennis All-Stars. So Tennis All-Stars eventually became Pete Sampras Tennis, which I absolutely loved. However, I didn't absolutely love this game. This game kind of feels like if someone who played tennis a few times with their friends but never actually watched tennis before made a tennis game. The risk reward is crazy. Your option seems to be either hit the ball straight back to your opponent or risk like a 90% chance of it going out. I've never seen so many outs in a single tennis game before, both from myself and the computer. It just completely kills the flow, and without some good rallies, tennis isn't great. They've also weirdly positioned the unnecessary ball boys in front of the set score and the game score for some reason. Judging by how many old tennis games feel so similar in gameplay, I've always thought that it must be really hard to make a bad tennis game, but evidently not. Still, even a bad tennis game is generally an okay game. It's just Pong with more stuff, and who doesn't love Pong? I remember one of the main perks of Pete Sampras Tennis on the Mega Drive was that it came with 2 extra ports so you could play 4-player. I can't remember if I did ever play 4-player because having 3 friends as a kid seems a bit of a stretch. But I'd imagine this is quite a fun way to play, even though the ball's just going to be going out all the time. Number 4, Super Skidmarks. So finally we're onto the quality stuff, and we'll kick off the hits with Super Skidmarks. I'd never played this one before. I remember seeing the box, and the box art put me off. I think it's got like cows on a skateboard or roller skates. And this game has absolutely nothing to do with cows on roller skates. This is basically an off-road or rock and roll racing clone, and it's pretty decent, and I love Super Off-Road, so I was quite happy to give this one a go. There's no power-ups like you get in off-road, and it's purely just about the driving and getting hang of skidding around the corners. There's a lack of a career mode, so you don't get to do the upgrades that you get again in Super Off-Road. It's just all based around just pure driving. This lack of career mode does make the solo gaming get a bit stale. It's quite fun trying to master the courses and difficult, but I think if you've got 3 friends to play this game with, well, you're a liar. Number 3 is Cannon Fodder. I'd imagine this is one of the games most people would have bought the collection for. I used to love this one growing up. I had it on the Acorn Archimedes, and although this version doesn't have the controversial lyrics and the music, it pretty much feels the same. It's clearly designed for home computers, but the console ports did come out and still play surprisingly well. You control your army of soldiers with the cursor and basically tell them where to walk and control the direction which they're shooting. You can swim in water, but you can't shoot in it, so you need to plan your routes properly. Negatively, it can get a bit repetitive, and without direct control of your army, you find that they're constantly getting stuck on the terrain, which is pretty annoying. Number 2 is Psycho Pinball. On most other collections, this game will probably get the number 1 spot. It's one of the first pinball games I ever played, and for the most part it still holds up really well. Sure, there's a few issues, particularly the Wild West theme area where the game's visuals can seem quite hard to handle with the speed of the ball. But like I mentioned on a previous review, pinball games are all about the ball physics and the tables, and this game nails them both. Sure, the ball physics are hardly as good as something more modern like Zen Pinball, but they're good enough, and it's a really fun game to play. There are 4 tables to choose from. The Funhouse and the Little Mermaid rip-off table are both great. Wild West one's mostly decent, barring the issues I've mentioned. And then there's the Halloween table, which isn't particularly that good because half the table's taken up by something. Overall, it's a great game though, and definitely a must-play on the collection. The number 1 game on the Codemasters Collection 1 is Sensible Soccer. No surprises here. Most people, myself included, will want this collection purely for some Sensible Soccer nostalgia, and being that it's at my number 1 spot, this one doesn't just rely on nostalgia alone. For years, Sensible Soccer was the best football game around. While other games were trying to make their football games look good, Sensible Software were focusing on making it play good, and 30 years later, it still does. For a 1 to 2 button game, it's got a fairly steep learning curve when it comes to scoring goals, especially good ones. It took me a few 0-0s and 1-0 scrambles before I found my groove again and was scoring absolute screamers. The pace is frantic, curving your shots to perfection is oh so satisfying, as is dirty game-saving tackling slide tackles from behind. What it lacks in real player names and graphics, it absolutely makes up for in gameplay. Sensible Soccer offers a host of modes, different leagues, cups, and obviously 2-player versus. It's absolutely the best game on this collection. So that's it. There's nothing really garbage, but there's quite a few mediocre titles on here. But there are 2 excellent ones in Sensible Soccer and Psycho Pinball, which are probably worth the £15 on their own. So you can think of the rest as bonus titles. For that reason, I'm going to rank this collection 8.5 out of 10. So thanks for watching. I'm the Games Apprentice. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more Evercade reviews, don't forget to click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.